In this video, we're going to talk about using the rhetorical triangle. First of all, let's talk a little bit about what the rhetorical triangle is. This may be completely new to you, or this may be something that you saw in grade school. Either way, we're going to use it to apply to arguments that we look at. The rhetorical triangle is a way of thinking about methods of persuasion. You can use it as an organizing tool for analyzing arguments. And then you notice it's got three components: ethos, pathos, and logos. The rhetorical triangle is just this. It's a visual representation of three elements of persuasion. In theory, it's an equilateral triangle, and all three of these elements are used equally. But we will see, however, that arguments often favor one method over others. So let's take a look at the component parts. Ethos. Ethos is the appeal to credibility, expertise, and reputation. It is the way a speaker or a writer establishes that they have the experience, education, reputation, and knowledge to make the argument. Pathos, on the other hand, is an appeal to emotion. It's when the speaker seeks to get an emotional response from the audience. Some common emotional appeals that make effective arguments are shock, pity, disgust, and guilt. Logos is the appeal to logic and reason. Logos appeals include using facts, statistics, logical reasoning, anecdotal evidence, graphs, models, and visuals. So let's take a look at how it's used. So when you're using the rhetorical triangle as a framework for your argument analysis, you should first consider the speaker's audience and purpose. We're going to take a look at some advertisements using the rhetorical triangle. And the reason we're going to do that is advertisements are some of the clearest examples of arguments that use one rhetorical strategy more than others. So we will first take a look at some of them. It is important to work with a couple of assumptions. First, advertisements are intended to persuade the viewer to like, identify with, or otherwise purchase their product. Second, advertisements are directed at specific audiences they intend to persuade. So let's take a look at an ad that relies heavily on pathos. This is an ad from the SPCA. It says, "Throw me a bone here." And we see a picture of a dog. And underneath the "Throw me a bone here" line, it says, "Support the only no-kill shelter in the Fredericksburg area." So these red arrows here point out some of the elements of the advertisement that appeal to pathos. Consider these possible emotional responses: guilt, pity, fear, and dependence. So again, what we're doing is we're looking at how this SPCA advertisement is trying to convince someone to identify, like, or even donate to this particular organization. So let's start at the top of the advertisement. "Throw me a bone here." So the dog is asking for help, which may solicit a response of guilt or pity. It also notes that it's the only no-kill shelter in the area. So again, appealing to a sense of guilt or pity, maybe even fear. The idea that otherwise this animal might face destruction in a city pound. Notice the dog's eyes are big, and it's looking up at the camera. I think that's deliberate. The big eyes make it look sort of innocent. And again, that all contributes to the emotional response. Notice as well that this dog doesn't look like a stray dog. He has a tag in the shape of a heart, and he's groomed. It's obviously had an owner at some point. So that makes the pathos a little bit more complicated, because we're not just talking about stray dogs going to the SPCA, but we're talking about someone's pet getting lost, perhaps, and going to the SPCA, which is a no-kill shelter. So again, maybe playing on the fear of a pet owner, the idea that maybe your pet would go to a kill shelter if the SPCA weren't funded properly and weren't allowed to exist. Let's take a look at an ethos appeal. This advertisement is from the Got Milk campaign, and if you've ever seen a Got Milk ad, you know that they rely on the reputation of the people pictured with the milk mustaches. So here we've got Michael Phelps, an award-winning, believe he was an 8-time gold medalist at the last Olympics. He's an Olympic swimmer. So the red arrows point to some of the elements of the advertisement that appeal to ethos. Consider why the advertisement uses this particular image of Phelps to advertise milk. Okay, so we see Michael Phelps in a swim cap and goggles, and he's stretching in a swim stroke. He's also wet, so he looks like he's either just come from the pool or is possibly in the pool. And that's an appeal to ethos. So the idea is we're going to connect milk as a product to Michael Phelps' reputation as a world-class athlete. Does nutrition contribute to athleticism? Of course. So if we associate milk with Michael Phelps, then we're associating milk with athleticism and good health. Notice Michael Phelps is also an accomplished Olympic athlete, and he has a milk mustache. So the milk mustache is intended to make it suggest or look like he drinks milk. And notice they chose Michael Phelps. Of course, he's a famous Olympic swimmer. And then there's actually a little bit of text at the bottom of the ad. It's a little bit hard to see, but the top line says liquid gold, and this refers back to his swimming gold medal. So again, we're associating milk with Michael Phelps and with his reputation as a world-class athlete. Let's take a look at a logos appeal. This is a Toyota advertisement for a gas-electric hybrid Prius. So the red arrows point to some of the elements of the advertisement that appeal to logos. Consider the facts included in this advertisement. So we start out with the headline that says, "More green for less green." So right off the bat, in large letters, we're looking at the logical idea that if you buy this car, you'll somehow be saving money. And again, that's a logical idea. They're trying to convince you to buy the car because it's a good deal. Then if we look at the lower left-hand corner, we'll see that it advertises specific prices. So again, a logos appeal, they're giving you specific facts about what it costs. And then if we look on the lower right-hand corner, it provides facts about emissions, miles per gallon, etc. in this paragraph. It says it runs up to 90% cleaner. It also tells us it gets up to 52 miles per gallon and 566 miles per tank. So that's giving us statistics related to the car. So this ad is using primarily logic to try and persuade us that the Prius is a good idea, and perhaps a good idea for our next vehicle. So the rhetorical triangle can also be applied to text. Now, when we looked at the advertisements, we looked at some of the visual as well as the written elements of these three methods of persuasion, but I just want you to see that it's also very clear in text. These are the first few paragraphs of Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with Martin Luther King, but one thing you may not be familiar with is he was an excellent rhettr. In other words, he was very skilled in using the principles of rhetoric that we're talking about when we discuss the rhetorical triangle. So let's take a look at what he says. And again, this is the "I Have a Dream" speech. He says, "I'm happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American, in whose symbolic shadow we stand today, signed the Emancipation Proclamation." So a great American he doesn't name, but we can all sort of piece together the idea that this is Abraham Lincoln. "This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice." So there we've got the idea of searing in flames. We've got a little pathos appeal. "It came as a joyous daybreak to the end of a long night of their captivity." And the idea of using the metaphor of the night is also a pathos appeal. There's a little bit of ethos in that as well in terms of hearkening back to history. "But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languishing in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. So we have come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. Now here we've got some logos because we've also got references to history. And as I said before, that's also got a little bit of ethos in it. And I want you to see here that the ethos, pathos, and logos oftentimes overlap with one another. So please be aware of that when you're doing your further analysis. But here we also have a lot of pathos. We're talking about the current civil rights situation in the United States, but he's using lots of imagery from slavery, manacles, the idea of being chained, chains of discrimination. So all of these concrete images provide a pathos appeal in that paragraph. In a sense, we have come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So here we've got a combination of all three of these appeals going on. We've got a bit of ethos. He's referring back to history. He's talking about the reputation of the United States. It also shows that King himself was a student of American history, which again, ethos is the appeal to reputation or credibility, so he's establishing his credibility. We've also got some pathos here with the idea, the metaphor of a check, the idea that this is something that's owed to every American. And we've also got a logos appeal here. The analogy to a check makes the situation and the current state of civil rights much, much clearer. And again, we've got logos in the form of reference to the Declaration of Independence. So this has been an explanation of the rhetorical triangle, ethos, pathos, and logos. Thank you very much.